Our instincts are hardwired to avoid pain and to seek pleasure. It's part of our programming that keeps us alive, to stay away from things that are harmful to us if they cause them pain, and to pursue our hungers to be fed and nurtured in wholesome ways. That's the basic operation. Of course, that can kind of get twisted around from time to time. But it's interesting to see how Jesus wants us to deal with pain. He himself is known as this great divine healer. Heals people from their physical afflictions, drives out demons that are tormenting them, calls us to be compassionate towards other people, to do what we can to eliminate suffering. But then to his own disciples, basically tells them to suck it up buttercup, that if they're suffering persecution, that they shouldn't run from it, they shouldn't lash back, they should learn how to deal and accept it. We have to be careful on how we do that, because just as it's inappropriate perhaps to try to escape all pain, it's also sketchy determining how we try to deal with our pain psychologically. It's well known that if we don't deal with our pain appropriately, we end up sharing it with other people, either unintentionally or intentionally. And that's usually not what we want. So how are the disciples supposed to deal with their persecution, their sufferings, in such a way that it is something that they learn and grow from, and they don't take it out on other people? We know from our own human experience that sometimes we can learn more from our failures than we can from immediate success. It's the school of hard knocks that teaches us more. And I think the same is true from pain can actually lead us to a greater sense of well-being, or cause us to pursue our well-being just as much or perhaps even better than some of our pursuits of pleasure. So there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. So how are we supposed to know the difference? Which is the suffering that we're supposed to eliminate, and which is the suffering and pain that is supposed to be the thing that we pay attention to, learn how to endure, and learn from it such that we become healthier, more whole individuals that are capable of living the gospel with other people. That's the point of life-going consciousness, to pay attention to what things are painful that we need to deal with in an appropriate way. Right now, in the midst of this pandemic, we're suffering all sorts of things, and I'm not sure that we're doing our best to learn from the mistakes or from the pain. And that's okay. We've got some time to sort through some of these things. Ultimately, Jesus gives, in the gospel passage, something that I think is kind of a shallow reasoning, rationale. That if you're in suffering now, just don't worry, it's temporary, because the joy that you receive in the end will be so great, so intense, that you'll forget the suffering that took place. Well, for inquiring minds, that's not exactly satisfying. We don't want to believe that the end justifies the means in every circumstance. Just because you're happy in the end, does that mean that it warrants any pain that you're supposed to endure in the process of getting there? And what if the suffering that we go through and experience is kind of irrelevant, doesn't have any particular purpose or meaning? Our conscious mind wants to eliminate that as much as possible. We want to beg the question of why God allows evil to exist in the world in the first place. Jesus says that in the end, when we're experiencing this great joy, we're no longer going to question him about anything. Is it a case that we know the answers, or is it a case that we no longer care because we're living the good life then? So I'm not sure that this is the right answer to all this. In our first reading, we hear about Paul that hears from God in a vision. God tells him to not be afraid, to endure what's going on, because God is with him all the time. And I think in that is a clue for us here on earth, not simply to endure suffering because we think that heaven's going to be the great relief in the end. It's kind of like you slam your hand in a car door repeatedly because it feels so much better when you stop. I don't know that that's the right rationale. Instead, if we find comfort and consolation in knowing that somehow God is with us in the midst of the pain, we're less in need of an answer as to why it exists in the first place. We don't understand why it exists, but if God is with us, for some reason, it seems to be more tolerable, better for us, because if God is in the midst of the pain, bearing it with us, then it's not a matter of we're feeling alienated, lost, or being persecuted. Rather, God is in it with us, so therefore, maybe it's okay. It's interesting that when we are children and we are going through things, if our parents are doing it with us, we stop asking the question of why we have to do it. Somehow there's a lesson to be learned, and we accept that kind of intuitively. So as we go through our various sufferings in this world, whether or not it's due to a pandemic or our own individual afflictions, if we can somehow find company, and if we can be of support to one another, maybe the question of why pain exists is not as important as the lessons that we learn through it.